Whether it's training and employment, workplace safety, or supporting newcomers, technology and digital inclusion have a major impact on the priorities and responsibilities of the Department of Labor, Skills and Immigration. In this special session, we'll talk to the Honourable Jill Balser, Minister of Labour, Skills and Immigration, about how technology is transforming the department's delivery of services and how they are finding ways to support digital inclusion for all Nova Scotians. Now, let's meet our special guest for this session. Jill Balser is the Minister of Labour, Skills and Immigration and is the Minister responsible for the status of women. She grew up in Digby with her two sisters, Erin and Anne, and was first elected to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly as MLA for Digby-Annapolis in 2021. Minister Balser received her BSc in Environmental Biology and a Certificate in Business Administration from the University of New Brunswick. She played varsity basketball for 5 years, and after graduating from UNB, she received her postgraduate diploma in Sport and Event Marketing from George Brown College. Prior to being MLA, she was the project lead for the Inspiring Communities Initiative Turning the Tide, a nonprofit organization in Digby, and she spent 4 years as the Y-Reach Immigrant Settlement staff member at the Fundy YMCA. Minister Balser, welcome to GEO Forum 2024.
Thank you, Matt. It is such an honor to be here with you and with everyone who is joining us virtually.
So I've known you for years. I don't think I ever knew you went to UNB. We have that in common.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, gosh, Matt, how did we not know this?
Well, no, what we don't have in common is you graduated from UNB.
Okay.
I just went there for a while. That's why you're the minister and I'm here. Okay, so you're the Minister of Department of Labor, Skills and Immigration. Yes. Tell us about that department. What is it that the department does?
I have to start off by saying that our department is absolutely wonderful in the sense that everything that we do, people is at the center of the work of the Department of Labor, Skills and Immigration. People are at the heart of the work that we do. So of course with the conference, and we're thinking of digital inclusion and how we connect people to not only one another, but how do they connect to training opportunities? How do they connect to employment opportunities? How do they continue to reskill and upskill in our changing economy, in our changing province? And also within our department, of course, we have the population and immigration branch. So when you're thinking of newcomer needs, and that's why when you mentioned my experience working at the YMCA, like all of that is still so true in my heart when I think about newcomers. And so whether it's using devices for translation services, or again, it's connecting to community and opportunities, we all want to have a sense of belonging, and we all deserve it through any opportunity that presents itself. So really the department is about people and connecting to people to anything that they need to thrive in our province.
Love it, love it. And the title kind of says it all. It's labor and it's skills and immigration. There's a lot covered in there, though.
There absolutely is. Yeah. And I have to say that when I was first appointed as Minister for Labor, Skills and Immigration, the Premier had said, what do you think, of the title? And honestly, my jaw hit the floor and I was like, of course, yes! But all I heard was immigration. And so I thought to myself, and I told my family this afterwards, I'm like, I'm not sure the whole department, but I heard immigration, so he must have seen and respected the fact that I have experience as a settlement worker and I can bring that to the role. And that's what I do every day with the team when we're thinking about improving programs or the needs of Nova Scotians. We have to make sure that government can change and be nimble and flexible to, again, our changing province. So the fact that I get to lead this incredible team and be a part of this incredible team is really an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, so for those of you who are less maybe politically tuned in than a few of us, the department wasn't LSI,
no, it wasn't,
as we now call it, before the last election. There was labor and advanced education, and immigration was separate. And
yeah.
So this government is innovating in a number of different ways as far as how it structures itself, and your department would be an example of that.
Absolutely, yes.
Very cool. And we heard again from Minister LeBlanc this morning of cybersecurity and digital
lovely.
solutions, a department that didn't even exist a couple of years ago. Very cool to see.
Yeah.
So, labor, skills, and immigration, and here we are for digital inclusion, so we have to get into the intersection between them. How do you see internet and technology changing the way the department is achieving its priorities?
Yeah, and I'll start by giving some acknowledgement and love and attention to one of our branches that perhaps doesn't necessarily get the same recognition, and that's our safety team. So the safety team brought forward an idea that would put safety regulations and information in the hands of Nova Scotian workers. So if you're out on a construction site and you might not know necessarily the fall protection that's in place, or if your employer had asked you to do something and you might not know all the regulations around it, accessing that information from your mobile device right there on the work site is a brand new way that the department has been thinking around what are the needs of Nova Scotian workers today. And then also, what is the needs like later on down the road, and how can we plan and be innovative for how our province is going to continue to change? So the fact that you can access that type of information, safety information, it's really important because, again, a goal of the department is to make sure that Nova Scotia workers and employers are protected, that they know their rights, and they have access to that information when they need it. So that's just one highlight that I really wanted just to start off with, and it's the Nova Safe app. So if anyone is looking for something to plug into or tune into, I would definitely give our safety branch a shout out for that work because it was absolutely incredible. And then when you're thinking about who's going to access this, the app is soon going to be available in 80 different languages.
Wow.
Because when you think about, again, the diversity in our province and folks who are moving internationally or even from different provinces around our population that's growing and changing, we have to make sure that services that government provides is accessible in multiple languages. So again, the safety team brought that forward and said, here's what we want to launch, here's how we can make it inclusive and accessible, so let's go, let's do it.
I love it.
But when we also think about some of the other connections that the department has, and I think it's another unique part of labor skills and immigration, is our partnerships. So the organizations that the department has funding relationships with, or just, again, collaboration with, our community learning organizations comes to mind. And of course, I know, Matt, you're very familiar with the Digby Area Learning Association as just one example of an organization that I have to give a shout out because it's in my hometown, and one that I just absolutely adore when you're thinking of adult learners and their needs. So if someone maybe didn't finish high school but found themselves in a position to say, I'm ready to go back and get my GED, which is now going to be changing to a Canadian model, which is quite exciting. So all of the testing will now have Canadian examples and stories so that Nova Scotia learners can reflect on Nova Scotia history, but also Canadian history as well. But making sure, again, it's modernized, it's adaptable, it can change as it's needed, and we're listening to learners as well to say, what is it that you need? So having devices available and making sure that people can access things online, it's just such a pivotal part of what we're doing and how we are as a province.
Yeah, well, so much of what you're talking about is really getting critical information to people in the time and place where they need it. Because information does no good unless you have it when you need it. It's like a tool. Yeah. If you can't find it at the time you need to use it, you might as well not have it. And so safety information, or how to access different programs, or how to pursue these life goals.
Absolutely.
It just seems...
And even just how training is offered now, just for the fact that if you live in a rural community like Digby, or from one end of the province to the other, the fact that you can tune in to a conference like this is incredible, So our department is also about breaking down barriers and meeting people with where they're at. So if it might mean I can tune into a training online because I'm working and I'm caring for my family, and this is the time that I can do it in my own home, that's incredible. So the access and the way in which that training is now provided is such an important piece too. So our Nova Scotia Work Centres are the employment agencies across the province, and having an online platform that people can tune into is another way that we can create that connection for Nova Scotians.
It's great. So, Minister, you've talked a lot about the kind of culture of the department, really engaging with people, meeting them where they're at. I have to ask, because I know in your previous role with Turning the Tide in Digby, that's a collective impact initiative. It was all about bringing the people impacted by the discussions you're having to the table. I'm going to put you on the spot and say, how responsible are you for this culture at LSI? Is it, because it really feels like it's reflecting your approach.
Oh,
was it like that when you showed up?
That's a great question. I would like to say that perhaps my background in community development is shining through. And actually, I'll use the example of our workers' compensation review. So that is a system that hasn't been looked at in 20 years.
Wow.
20 years. So just this past legislative session, I introduced a bill for the protection and safety of Nova Scotia workers. And in it, we're now legislating a review of the workers' compensation system to happen every 5 years. But how we got to that point was taking the safety team out on the road and consulting and meeting with Nova Scotians from one end of the province all the way to the other. So I really took my learnings from Inspiring Communities and said, this has to be different. It can't just be a government consultation. Let's make sure that we're meeting people where they're at. We do as many sessions as we possibly can, and then more, because if someone comes forward and says, I have a story to share, and I'm an injured worker, and I want to make sure that if this system is going to transform in the way that it needs to be, I want my voice to be a part of that work. So that's what we did. We had multiple sessions. It took a year to complete all of the work from the time that we met with Nova Scotians, heard with what they had to say, went back and shared the report. We had a review committee that was digesting all of this information. And so when the chair presented that report to me, it really felt the voices of Nova Scotians were included. But I think there was a piece of me that felt everyone from Inspiring Communities that I used to work with and informed and supported me in the work that I was doing in Digby, I felt that they also shine through in that work too.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful example of how, you know, in order to kind of get where we need to go successfully, if we're, you know, going to impact a lot of people in a lot of different situations, we can either go there quickly and then deal with all the ways it doesn't work, and it would probably take a much more protracted amount of time, or we can slow down, build relationships of trust and respect, listen carefully, and then try to make sure that what you're developing reflects what you've heard. Because when you do that, it inspires more people to show up, right? I think a lot of people would maybe have fairly earned a certain amount of cynicism that says, I'm not going to answer a government question because it's not going to matter what I say.
Absolutely.
And when people go through a process like you've described and they put the effort in and they see change happening as a result, it begins to lift away some of that cynicism, and it will inspire maybe others to say, there is a place for my voice in there, and there is change that's happening that I can impact.
Absolutely. And I think that that was one thing that was really important too, that when Nova Scotians contribute to change, that they need to feel as though that, again, they were a part of that process, that their story and their personal lived experience is reflected in that, but then it's not a report that sits on a shelf. So that's why I was so proud of the fact that we had the report live, or it was launched, and in a few days when the House went into session, it was the first bill that I introduced, and there's also going to be more work to come. And I think that that's also, as we know, how you build trust in community is going back and reporting and showing up in community, and not always asking
that circle, right?
Exactly, for people to come here. And I think that's another reason why the way in which we work and interact is changing, and it's improving in ways that we never would have thought imaginable without technology and digital inclusion. And so now with that at the forefront, it's making sure that during that WCB review, the workers' compensation review, we had virtual options. So if it was the committee and members were in different parts of the world, we know that people tuned in because the work was so important. And again, making sure that they could do it on their own time in a way that they could still be a part of the process. That's the way in which we have to continue to do work.
That's very cool. I love this example because it's you know, a little bit divergent from, you know, the ones we're talking about a lot, the individual who doesn't have the connectivity or devices and skills, and how their life and their family's life is transformed when that happens. But, you know, digital transformation, digital access is changing the way that the government works behind the scenes. The stuff that we might not see, but is really impacting what kind of comes out.
Yes. Absolutely. And actually, just driving up this morning, I was hearing or listening to the radio, and there were comments around, of course, with the transformation of one patient, one record in the health system. So having digitized health information, and then with the your NS Health app, having access to that. But that again goes back to, you have to have a device in order to access it. And I know, Matt, you and I have talked about that a lot, and that's another reason why GEO Mobile is so important, and the work that GEO is doing is so important. Because when you can give someone the power, like to encourage them and empower them to make decisions for themselves by just providing that one piece that might have been missing, so whether it was a phone or a device of some kind, get connected, And it's just amazing how people can, take back control of their own lives in situations that may have felt stressful or if life happens, right? So we have to be able to adapt.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for bringing up the Nova Scotia Health app and GEO Mobile, which is our recently launched program to provide mobile devices and mobile service to people who can't otherwise afford it. Because I'm going to do a little pitch here for a cool project that we're working on. One of the things that we've experienced over the last few years is that people who are getting digital inclusion, who may not have had that kind of access before, won't necessarily know what's available, right? And there's so many new things coming on at any given time. Just because you've got a device doesn't mean you know all these great things.
Of course.
So we're trying to take advantage of the fact that there's this kind of moment in time where one of our partners is going to hand over this phone to say, by the way, after you activate it, we even have a little insert card, and it's got the QR codes and descriptions of kind of our top recommended apps that you put on the phone right away. Number one app, My Nova Scotia Health app.
Hey,
right?
That's great.
The next thing we're doing, a shout out to the Mental Health Foundation Nova Scotia. If you're watching, thank you very much for the grant. We're using those resources in the next month, and we're going to make a little, we call it an e-mental health pocket guide.
Wonderful.
Size of your phone, goes in the box, 5 or 6 pages. Each page will describe one of the e-mental health apps that the province supports with the QR code to use it. Just what can we do to get the information to people when they need it so it's useful, right? We invest so much in these things online, but they're only going to work if people know about them.
Yeah, and then speaking, that made me think there too, Matt, another reason why partnerships are so important. So going back to our community learning organizations. So if you have a device and it might be, okay, I need a little support on how to use it, where do you go to get that support? And so I know back in Digby, the team, that's what they're doing with the tech help that's available, or even in libraries across the province. There are ways in which people can learn and feel supported and not necessarily, okay, thank you for this device, but now what? But being encouraged to use it and learning how to use it. And that's another reason why intergenerational support is such an interesting thing that's happening through community learning organizations too. I know for young people to help support seniors in their community as an example. Because we all know during COVID, that connection of family and friendships all happened online. And so if you didn't necessarily know how to use a device, we didn't want anybody to be left behind. So to know how far we have come and how we have to keep going, it makes the work of the department, again, really exciting.
Yeah, I bet it does. So you've mentioned community learning organizations, CLOs, all over the province, right? Adult learning associations and whatnot. And as you know, out of our 100 referral partners, a substantial proportion are actually CLOs. And one of them, you've already mentioned, the Digby Area Learning Association, close to your heart because it's close to your home. I'm going to share a little story with you from them. So this came from our partners at DALA talking about a participant that's a learner there and who has been studying for their high school diploma. They got the laptop and the connectivity through GEO Nova Scotia. They didn't have that before. And the connectivity is helping her complete her high school requirements. The laptop, they say, has been helpful for schoolwork because she researches topics relevant to her course. She's regularly using word processing and spreadsheets now to complete assignments. And this is the one I really love. Now she's learning to use Facebook to advertise her small business.
Oh my goodness.
So this sort of, individual development is also community development, especially in rural areas where a lot of services might not be immediately at your doorstep. How does this sort of story make you feel?
Well, it just makes my heart burst. And I know, Matt, that there's probably so many stories like that across the province, but that just goes back to the heart work. Community work is such, it's driven by love and compassion, and when you can hear stories like that, that's where I do go back to my learnings from Inspiring Communities. And I remember what sort of drove me to run in the first place when people had said, the work that you're doing with Inspiring Communities is really giving you a bit of a campaign platform, if you will. But it was more about connection. It was more about learning the issues in the community and then bringing them forward. And that was something that was really important for me. And now as minister and as an MLA for Digby Annapolis is making sure that government is a listening partner and that we are sitting at the table. Because when I was with Inspiring Communities and in the nonprofit world, advocating for government partners to show up with community, with business, with the private sector, with the nonprofit sector. So I told myself, I said, I will be that government partner that we were championing for. And I really think, going back to that question that you asked of whether or not sort of I'm reflective of what's going on in the department, and I think in some ways that approach It is, and I really bring that forward in a lot of the work that I do. But that's where, if we have organizations like GEO and others that are doing incredible work, it's sitting around the table and figuring out how can government support that without telling what you're supposed to be doing. And that's what's so important, and I think that that's the relationship that LSI has with our community organizations.
Well, that's awesome, and that is the recipe of collective impact. I mean, we call it stone soup because the
Yes.
story is a lot more accessible, but really it's this idea that, you know, the government and the public sector and businesses in the private sector and this vast variety of community organizations in that nonprofit sector, each one of us has superpowers. We have things that no one else can do. We've got perspectives or resources or expertise or connections. And work like digital inclusion requires all of it. So the only way we've gotten as far as we have in Nova Scotia, as a leader now in digital inclusion, is because of the way that our businesses in Nova Scotia are showing up not as vendors, but as partners. Government isn't showing up as I'm a funder, here's a check, give me what I want. Right? You're showing up as a partner. Here's what we're trying to achieve. What are you trying to achieve? How can we work together? And the way that you're bringing the community sector along, whether it's the CLOs or the hundred sort of organizations we have, it's really inspirational. It goes back to that idea when people see their piece being respected, seeing it make a difference, it inspires more of the same.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, let's talk about employment again. How do you see digital inclusion impacting training and employment? What's happening these days, and where do you think things are going to go?
So within our skills and learning branch, of course, having training opportunities for folks that are looking for, if it's a micro-credential as an example, we had a launch for a platform of short courses that people can access online to get right back into the workforce. So if it's a particular skill set that an employer might say, well, geez, like this person just needs a little training. Well, hey, if you can go online and get that course and then apply it right away while you're learning at the same time, it's also evolving to how we are working in the province and how that has changed. And so accessing tools and technology to be able to do that, it's transforming our workplaces. So it's another important point as to why the safety department is keeping up with that and making sure that safety information is accessible. Nova Scotia Works also has incredible programs for employers as well. So again, going back to the example that Dalla had provided, is that someone is now using Facebook to promote their business. We also have supports for employers to do just that, or find wage subsidies to support their employers or employees, but also to find those people, right?
Yeah.
So how we interact online is just so important. And when you have the resources and the organizations to support you along your learning journey, that's what we want to be able to achieve as a department for all Nova Scotians. And then I also think about our settlement organizations as an example. So just pivoting over to the immigration side now too, right?
Oh,
there we go.
That's where we're going next. So.
But when you think about someone who is brand new, again, may not speak the language, needs to enroll in an English as an additional language course, but then how do they access information for their kids at school? Or, maybe it's recreation opportunities. And if you're getting all that information online, then how do you access that if you don't necessarily have those devices? So again, it just goes back to how all of the work that we're doing together is so interconnected. And really, again, at the heart of it is just seeing Nova Scotians thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to talk more about the impact on newcomers, but to tell you a real quick story, in our very first year, in our community year in 2020, when we were just a GEO project, a little Dartmouth North upstart, one of the first people that we connected, this was when we were in kind of full lockdown mode too, and what was so exciting about her story is she had previously been a volunteer at ISANS doing English as a second language with people.
Yes.
But as soon as COVID came and everything went online, her ability to volunteer and participate disappeared because she didn't have the connectivity. So when she got the device and the internet, the first thing she did was rejoin that volunteer piece to be that support person.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's great. So newcomers, as you said, language is often a challenge. It's an incredible, I reflect on individuals who are willing to travel the world, resettle, find, some are doing it because they're choosing, some are doing it because they have to.
Absolutely.
Either way, it's a big deal. And throw in a different language, trying to navigate the world, it's got to be tough. Technology is so great, right? I mean, your screen can translate whatever's on the screen for you practically.
Yep.
So we've got language, we've got connectivity of local products and services,
Yep.
and then there's connections back home.
Yep.
You know, how do you worked in this sector?
I did,
you know, and as you said, you still carry a lot with you. How have those experiences and those memories, you know, impacting you now, and how do you see digital inclusion playing out for those folks?
Yeah, I think one of the examples that really jumps out in my mind is working in schools as a school settlement support worker. And so back in 2015, of course, when Canada had made its commitment to support Syrian refugees, that's when I was in the role with the YMCA. And at that time, I hadn't had a lot of clients that I was working with. So it was really trying to advocate for needs of newcomers. But at the time, when I was building relationships in community and coming back home, because of course I had lived in Toronto for about 5 years. And so when I was back home, folks had said, okay, Jill, like, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm supporting newcomers. And the question often would be, well, who are you going to work with? And so I was like, well, I'm going to find people and I'm going to advocate and I'm going to make sure that when folks arrive or they come to me for support, I'm going to know who's doing what all across the Digby area. And in 2015, that's when the work really came to life. So sponsorship groups were, of course, in touch with the federal government around families and trying to identify who they can support to come to Canada and then, of course, settle in Digby. It was an incredible journey. But thinking about even that process, all of it was through email or technology or making sure that those interactions were happening. It was, you know, of course, using devices. And so how a family who was living in a refugee camp in Lebanon ended up in Digby, Nova Scotia is an incredible journey on itself, but also for the people who were involved in that process, supporting them, getting the information they needed, and making sure that when the family arrived, all the supports were there in place. And being a part of that work was just transformational for me when it came to community work, when it came to settlement work. So then going into classrooms as an example and helping teachers, because as soon as the family arrived, nobody spoke English. But we had to be prepared to support in the best way possible. And how was that? It was with devices. It was providing a translation app. So I could go into the classroom and the teacher would say, this is what we're working on. If I, in my role, could take a couple students aside and we would work on an app with translation services and we would try to go through a few different things as the teacher was going through the lesson plan, it was incredible. But of course, the kids picked up the language so fast and then would often go home and support mom and dad in their learning. So it was just an incredible experience to be a part of and to see how that is continuing when we're working with our settlement organizations across the province, that all newcomers have access to that type of support.
Yeah, Nova Scotia really has come a long way in the last decade in terms of immigration and newcomers, not only in obviously the quantity, but the diversity and where they're settling, right? It really has been an about face, and it's been awesome. I mean, they bring so much, you know, culture and vibrancy to communities that were struggling with people, right? And not so much anymore. It's a really great challenge to be working with. So must be pretty amazing for you. In 2015, people are saying, you're working with newcomers in Digby, huh? Okay, and now?
Yeah. And I think just going back to just one of your earlier questions, because when I came in as minister, and like I said, like, that's my background. And for my team to say, like, minister, like, obviously you lived and breathed this work. You were a frontline worker. You're very informed of, like, the immigration pathways. And so for me to be able to just dive right in to say, okay, now what do we do? And of course, one of the highlights, I think, for me was supporting Ukrainian nationals. So the Premier and I were at the airport when a chartered flight of 300 people arrived, and then thinking again, it's all of that settlement experience coming back to life for me. So when folks were arriving in community, did they have connections? Do they have a place to stay? Do they know where they are and where they're going to land? And making sure that Nova Scotia could provide that safe haven for people in their time of need was incredibly important. But then giving people those tools and supports to be able to start a new life and connect to community and be able to thrive is what we're doing for newcomers, but for all Nova Scotians in so many ways.
I love it. I love it. You know, we have so much to be proud of in Nova Scotia, and one of the things we can be proud of, or just exceptionally grateful for, is the fact that we live in this tiny little corner of the world that is safe enough to welcome and bring other people. We have a privilege to bring other people here, to share this land with them and this place with them. And they pay us back 1,000 times over with their energy, enthusiasm, and those families and their future here. It's really exciting.
It really
you must
is.
love your job.
I really do, and I often say this to the team because I said, our department is the best. Like, I just love our department and I love the work that we do, but it really feels so authentic for me to be in this role given my experience and my background and really trying to champion all the great work that can be done for the province and for Nova Scotians, and even just thinking on places of where we can do better as well. Just the other day, the Skills and Learning team, we were talking about the Irony Report and making sure that we were looking at, right?
Remember that?
That was also in 2014, 2015, when we were told, we need to grow our population. But we also have to look at where are connections in community that need to be strengthened and improved upon. So when we think about African Nova Scotian communities across the province, and of course Indigenous and Mi'kmaq communities, we need to make sure that individuals are connecting online in the way that is meaningful for them in all ways. And so again, it was just trying to think, what are some barriers that we need to look at as a government in terms of supporting unique cultural communities as well.
Yeah, I love this, and it's really revealed, for me anyway, how Nova Scotia is, of course, filled with individuals. Many of us belong to then families that are impacted by what's going on in our life. But, we're hundreds, thousands of different communities as well, and many of them are geographic, right? And we can see them on a map and see the distance from one to the other, but there's a lot of cultural communities in this province, and they're not necessarily borders that you can see on a map. But they have unique needs, they have unique interests, they have unique contributions to make.
Absolutely.
Very cool. All right, well, we're going to pivot at 1:33.
Okay.
Because you are not just the Minister of Labour, Skills and Immigration.
This is true, yes.
Tell us about the Nova Scotia Office of the Status of Women.
Wow, well, it kind of pivots nicely because when we were also thinking of gender equality and equity, and that's really a focus, of course, for the Office of the Status of Women, when we're thinking about needs for gender diverse people and those who identify as female, there are unique barriers that can exist and what might be preventing them from entering the workforce. So as women across the province, we know that that's who's driving often the care sector and the care economy. So we need to make sure that when supports and services are being delivered, that we're taking those unique experiences into consideration. So whether it's caring for a loved one, if it's an elder, or if it's children, that can also be a reason why people aren't attaching to work. But back to training being available online where people can do a course and it's not holding them back, but they can do it on their own time. That's so incredibly important to make sure that it's not have to go to a classroom and it's at this time, and if you can't be there, then too bad, so sad kind of thing. It's how can we make this work for you? And so knowing, again, our partnership with GEO in providing cell phones, of course, for women who are fleeing violent relationships is incredibly important to give women back the power that they need in their time of need to say, here's a device so that you can connect to work, so that you can find a safe place, and you don't have to have that connection to your abuser. Because we know that that connection, and one of the reasons why many people stay, is that they don't see a way out. So having devices, I just think, Matt, that work is just so incredible, and it's so important, and we have to do more of it.
Great. Well, let me fill those of you in who are watching who don't know exactly what the minister is referring to. So the Office of the Status of Women, with the national funding for the National Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, joined with GEO Nova Scotia to actually pilot and launch what we call GEO Mobile. So this program that we opened up to all 100 referral partners in the summer, where they could request a refurbished mobile device, a choice, by the way. You don't get stuck with an iPhone. Right. Even if you don't like it, you can choose a Samsung or an iPhone. Anyway, so that program only really got off the ground because of the investment from the Office of the Status of Women. When we wanted to launch this, we needed partners, we needed a bit of extra funding, and that funding that came through from your department or from the Status of Women office, we also got connected with some community partners that we hadn't been connected with.
That's right.
The Transition Home Associations of Nova Scotia. So 12 different transition houses across the province supporting women and children fleeing from gender-based violence. And your team said, this is the group we'd like you to try to work with. Here are some resources and see what you can do. And that's what we did. We started back in December of last year, off the side of our desk, trying to build this little side program. And in the subsequent months, we've now distributed, I think we're up to close to 300 phones through that stream alone.
That's amazing.
To women in these situations. And then based on the success of that and kind of working some things out, like I said, we've launched across the province. So now we're well over 500 connections, and we'll probably be double that by the end of this year. And again, a large part due to the support and partnership from your office.
Oh, that's incredible. And I think it just goes back to, again, so I love the fact that the status of women with LSI, because there's so much interconnections there. So making sure that, again, when we're thinking about opportunities, it goes right back to that collaboration and partnership. So the fact that we signed the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence and thinking about community organizations are going to lead this work. They have to have the resources and supports to be able to support their clients, women and children in need, and making sure that, again, that government can be a partner in that. So I think that's just a beautiful way in which collaboration and partnership can support individuals in a really positive way. And knowing that government can be a part of that solution it's exciting work.
What I love about that is how, it's a perfect example of the government having something that only they can have, which are our collective resources to apply to an issue. But just because you're writing the check doesn't mean that you know what the right answer is. And that's, I don't think, been the culture of government for my lifetime, right? The people who pay the bills get to call the shots, right? But what do they know, right? So this idea that says, well, we can bring resources, but we need the local expertise. We need the relational currency and understanding of our partners to help make sure that the investment actually lands and works.
Absolutely.
I think is transformational.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so here is a text message from one of our clients.
Okay.
After receiving their device. They said, I'm very pleased with my phone. It's helping me so much. I was lost and in situations when I needed to call 911 and didn't have a working phone. I can't even imagine what that would be like. They said, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I can keep appointments now. I'm going back to school, and I'll definitely need my phone. Says it all.
It does. It really does.
So earlier this year, we actually saw a really neat national study that was done talking about women fleeing gender-based violence and the challenge with their devices. Yep. Oftentimes the program was connected to the abuser, and what they did as a study is they called, covertly, the big major carriers across Canada. So we work with Eastlink. They weren't on this call, but what they did is they posed as women trying to change their number, trying to move it over, trying to achieve that independence, just to see what the experience was like. And what they got was roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. Oh, well, that's going to cost you money. Or, oh, you just need to get them to give permission. Or all these other obstacles. And it really highlighted how critical, for safety, this device is, but how dangerous it can be if it's controlled by the person that you're trying to flee. And it was a real moment for us to say we're on the right track. Again, here in Nova Scotia, kind of leading the way to say, get it done. You said, just make sure they have what they need.
Yeah. And what I'm thinking, Matt, just like listening to you too, is then who's also making the policy decisions for someone in that scenario? When you're not listening to people with the lived experience to say, this happened to me, and these are the barriers that I'm up against. And I think that's why it's so important, especially in the Office of Status of Women, when we're engaging with Nova Scotians and those who've experienced a violent relationship or having to leave intimate partner violence, that when people come forward and share their experience, that government shows up in an authentic way as well with community partners. Because if we're not going to do something transformational, we don't want people to feel that, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, that where is this information going to go? You're going to ask for my personal experience, and then what? And so for folks, we don't want that re-traumatization. We want to make sure that people feel that something is going to change.
Yeah. The other thing that we've seen, the incredible value of that mobile device in times of crisis. unfortunately, here in Nova Scotia, is other emergencies, disasters, crises. They could be very individual, like some of the ones we're talking about, but some of them are very big, public and communal, you know, whether they're the forest fires or the storms or, heaven forbid, you know, other terrible incidents.
Yes.
And I think we're learning the hard way what happens if you can't connect or be connected when that's going on.
Absolutely.
So the province is now, talk about another department to respond
That's
to what's
right.
happening. We have a
Yes.
new department. Why don't you tell us about that and where things
Well,
are
I
going?
think this is going to start some really interesting conversations, of course, with the Nova Scotia Guard and the new Department of Emergency Management Services. So when we're also thinking about how information is going to get out to Nova Scotians, if it is on an alert through your phone, I mean, we know, again, from a safety perspective, people have to have that notification or here's what's happening in your community. And my goodness, I know we're thinking about all of those individuals in Florida right now with the hurricane coming through. And it makes you think, how are we as a province ready to respond if something was to happen? And of course, we have to take the lessons learned from summers ago with wildfires and flooding and making sure that we have the devices and the technology and speaking with first responders and making sure that their voice is showing up in any conversation that the department is having. So if we're looking at how information is brought forward, if it's calling 911 as a Nova Scotian looking for support or through the dispatch centers, I think technology, it's going to inform how that department operates.
No, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's very cool. I'm just going to do a little check over with my team member, Carrie. Do we have a door prize winner yet, Carrie?
Ooh.
Are you going to send it to me? Okay, so let's take a little pause and we're going to announce the door prize winner for this session. As soon as I can unlock my phone, don't know what I'd do without it. Here it is. Today's door prize winner for this session is Emmanuel Shodunke. I hope I got that right. From VANSDA. Do we know what that stands for? Valley African Nova Scotian Development Association. There you go. I just learned something new.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Emmanuel. You've just won a $250 gift card to Orchard, Canada's largest refurbisher of mobile devices. I'm getting good at that. I think they should start paying me.
Hey!
Okay, so let me tell you another little story. This one is from the Eastern Shore Musquodoboit Valley Literacy Network.
Okay.
Because of GEO support, we've been able to provide several of our learners with their own devices with which to learn digital skills. 2 participants in particular are using their new device to study, to take their CAEC. Maybe you can tell us what that stands for, because I don't know. 1 participant has no cell reception in their home, so having a Chromebook allows them to stay in contact with friends and family through video chat, something they just hadn't been able to do before.
Okay, so that's our new Canadian version of
That
GED.
is the Canadian. Well, there you go.
Yes.
That's exciting. So what do you think about that?
Oh, that's so lovely, and I know that Minister Smith will be very happy to hear, knowing that that's his riding and an organization in his riding, and it just goes and shows how connection is so important for anybody's learning journey, no matter where they are. So whether it's going back to school or even thinking about young people starting their careers, is making sure that they have access to that information and they find themselves on a pathway where they need to apply for, if it's training or post-secondary. It's just amazing when you think about connection in that capacity. And as we're discussing it, it's just how it's so much part of our daily lives. And for us who can take it for granted and thinking about, well, this is just a part of my life. But for those who don't have access, it's making sure that they have the same access and the ability to be able to enter the workforce, start a career, go back to school, whatever it happens to be, that they have the ability to do it.
Quite right. So we've talked about how much it can impact an individual and their family and their future. You gave us some great insight about how it's impacting and changing the way government thinks and acts and shows up. Let me give you some stats about what we hear from our community organizations and how it's impacting their work. 99% of our partners said that this work is better equipping them to serve communities. 98% said it's letting them reach program participants more effectively. 91% said that they can provide important services like education and healthcare to people who couldn't otherwise have them.
Wow.
You've been in community. What's it like when you're trying to help but can't? And then And what I can only imagine what it must be like to have a breakthrough opportunities like this to really get people what they need.
Yeah, geez, I'm trying to think of, so in my constituency, because again, a lot of government programs are all online. And so for MLA offices, I know that I still have a fax machine because people still come in with forms and say, can you fax this for me? So in some ways, we have to keep moving forward, but we also can't move so fast as we talked about that we're leaving people behind. But instead, it was, okay, the senior care grant, as an example. Through Minister LeBlanc's department, it did have an option to mail, fax, but then we recently introduced an online version. So people would come in my office, I have volunteers to help out to say, okay, on grant day is what we call it, that people can book appointments and they can fill out the forms, or we assist with that, or we go and do it online, but making sure that there are those options. But when you think about our first experience, that sometimes applications got lost in the mail, or someone will come back to the office and say, I haven't received my funding yet. And so then you're kind of panicking a little bit to say, okay, what happened? And so of course there just might be something was missed, you know, whether it was a piece of information that we needed to redo the whole application or what have you, but trying to make processes a little more streamlined is also making sure that we're not, again, leaving people behind. So I've often reflect on that in my own constituency office to make sure that we still have the ability to meet people where they're at, but then supporting them on a pathway that's moving in a digital direction.
That's really great. So here's a stat for you. And I mentioned this earlier. If you've only been watching my sessions, I'm sorry for repeating myself, but in the most recent survey, more than 26% of employed Nova Scotians are working half or up to 100% of their time online from home. This is really changing the way that we're working. It's changing where we can live and work. It's changing whether we even need to commute. It's changing the type of work that we can do, especially, again, in areas like Digby and our more kind of rural areas of the province. We're really experiencing how important that is. For those of us who maybe have a little bit of a city-centric bias, where you can get on a bus and go places, or you can just, you're 10 minutes away or something like that, it doesn't quite hit home quite as hard about how, especially if you don't have transportation, but even if you do, there's a lot of time, and gas is really expensive.
Yep.
And so to be able to access programs and services from where you're at really feels like part of the transformation of our rural areas, allowing them to be as productive, allowing people to thrive wherever they are.
Yeah.
In fact, we did a little bit of research, not only in the employment support program that you're familiar with, we mentioned earlier, where we went to Amherst and Digby Granville and North Sydney, Port Hawkesbury, Antigonish, Guysborough, South Shore, as well as HRM. We also did a breakdown of our referral partner network, which I thought was really interesting because we looked at where they were located. We, again, have just over 100 partners now.
It's amazing.
And 31 of them are HRM-centric. 36 are outside of HRM in mainland Nova Scotia. Another 11 are Cape Breton specific.
Okay.
So using organizations like the ones that we've mentioned in community is the way we can reach out. And I'm sure you're finding effective strategies there too. How does a government department or a single agency get into all these different communities? And the answer is often through people who are already there and organizations who are already there.
Yeah.
So as somebody who grew up and lives and supports a non-Halifax community, what's it like? What's it like to see that kind of maybe the divide in what's available for the city and the non-city beginning to dissolve?
Yeah, I'd say thinking of my moving back home again in 2015 and starting my career with the Y, and thinking about what services just didn't exist for newcomers. So the fact that when I went and spoke to the school when we were getting ready to support the families, the students going, or the kids going to school, even just looking at forms that didn't include another language, it was just English, French. And so we spoke with the school board at the time and said, is there a way to make sure that this is reflective for newcomer families? And so, in little old Digby, that was a big change, but knowing again that the diversity that we would have seen in Halifax, perhaps that might have been a change that was made years ago. So to see how communities are also forward thinking, they're also looking for ways in which, okay, if this particular thing doesn't exist, how can we make sure that clients can get that support? And so I find communities tend to work together, and if it is a referral partner happens to be in Yarmouth and you live in Digby, well, there's a connection there that can be made through an organization. And so I'm really proud of course, championing rural communities and their innovation and how they adapt and how they've adapted for quite some time, but how digital inclusion is changing that. Actually, and I just thinking about a young woman I had met, I was hiking the Van Tassel Lake Trail. So anybody down around the Digby area, if you want to see some blue felt lichen, that's where you need to go. And, and she just moved back home and is living with her grandparents, but her employer is in Halifax.
Awesome.
And she said, I've always wanted to be back in Digby, and I never thought that that was possible. But now, here, in this digital world that we're living in,
Yep.
there are opportunities in this province that didn't exist before. And somebody had said it to me, too. It's also how our workplaces are also changing. Careers are changing, jobs are changing. And in a way, we know that there are going to be occupations and careers that don't even exist for people who are going through our school systems now.
Yep.
So it's also like, how do we prepare that future workforce?
Yeah.
Right? It's incredible when you think about innovation and technology in that capacity.
Well, you know, Nova Scotia 100 and 150 years ago, it was all about building roads and building roads and building roads. And, you know, it's expensive, but it's the only way to get from where you are to anywhere else. And so it's kind of the infrastructure that lets the province kind of thrive and exist. And I think we're in a very similar place right now, and all the credit where it's due for the investments that are being made to make sure that there won't be a place to live in this province where you can't get high-speed internet is a big deal. And I know that the gap is getting smaller and smaller.
Yep.
The number of homes is shrinking, and the mobile service, there's some big investments being
Yes,
made
that's
there.
right.
So no more drop calls on the highway or
Yeah.
whole towns without service.
Right.
You know, it's like planting a tree, right? The
Yeah.
best time was 20 years ago. The next best time is
Yeah.
today. So that's really important. We have, as a great example, one of our fantastic employees, Ian, is in Guysborough. And the reason why one of the reasons that he and his family settled in Guysborough when they came here from Montreal was because it has incredibly good high-speed internet. It's not the only reason. Guysborough is lovely.
Wonderful.
And there's 1,000 reasons he loves it. But I don't think it would have been on the list of considerations if that service wasn't available. And
Right.
because it's available, Ian works for us, and he's brilliant, and his work alone has contributed to changing the lives of many people, and he's got a wonderful family there. So again, like this idea of having these wonderful communities that we're beginning to really struggle with people losing opportunities and therefore kind of moving away. Feel like there's new life being
Yeah.
breathed into them, new opportunities coming up.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's showing how workplaces can change and how employers can be innovative and thinking about ways in which they can support their employees. And again, that's all back at the work of what Labor Skills and Immigration does, is making sure that we are keeping up to where employers and the private sector and businesses want to go, and making sure that we have programs that reflect their needs. But then, of course, it's making sure that workers have what they need as well.
Yeah. Well, and I also got to give a shout out to our team for our international diversity. Ian's from England, Kamal is from India, and our newest hire, Jurin. Hi, Jurin. Is originally from Nigeria, I believe.
Wonderful.
So, and they're all incredible. I couldn't imagine us working without them. So it's just really great. I see we got a few minutes left. Let me check with Carrie.
Okay.
Has there been any burning questions coming through? No burning questions. Maybe some questions, but none that we're going to address. Or maybe not at all. That's okay. All right. So in our last remaining minutes, Minister Balser, where do you see the department going next? What is on the horizon? Tell us your secrets.
Oh, goodness.
Spill them here now.
Well, I know I'll give a little shout out to Minister McGuire, who I know is not well today. So we'll just say we're thinking of you because there's a big collaboration, I think, and an opportunity between Labor Skills and Immigration and Community Services to really make sure that, again, our
Are
employment...
you scooping Minister McGuire today?
I think we're seatmates in the legislature, so we tend to converse and say, well, what can we do to support workplaces? And also thinking about, again, as a Nova Scotia learner or worker, if you happen to be an income assistant recipient, we have multiple departments that touch many people, and so it's really more just bringing all of that work together. So someone doesn't have to say, okay, well, if you're on income assistance, you got to go over here. If you want to get job employment services, you got to go over here. But it's really making sure that that front-face connection to government is a positive one. And it's one where people can wrap their arms around an individual and say, okay, we're here to support you in your learning journey, and here are the programs that are available to you. Not necessarily the other way around, so that the individual is then trying to find and navigate all these different supports that exist, but may not know the exact name of the program that they're eligible for. So I think for the fact that our workplaces are going to continue to change, we as a government have to continue to be innovative and adapt to that change and be there with it as it happens. So really listening to Nova Scotians is always going to be at the heart of what we do, but I think this is an opportunity to really pause and reflect and making sure that what is available to Nova Scotians makes sense.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Department of Community Services and Labour Skills and Immigration are probably the two departments that, whose agencies out there in the community that we intersect with the most. And there is a lot of overlap. There's a lot of the same people, being served and supported.
Exactly.
So the idea of not feeling like you're going to go to one silo and tell your whole story and fill out 1,000 forms and then be pointed to the next silo and start it all over
Absolutely.
again and again and again is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I think that was also, again, from our time at Inspiring Communities, of really understanding like what that meant, or even the scarcity mentality too, for funders to feel as though if I'm getting supports from community services and then I'm going to apply for something from LSI, how it has to feel, if it's not, or almost different. So it's really bringing it all together to say, we can support organizations in the work that they need to do, and it's multiple funding relationships, or just making all of that kind of come together and feel like it's gelling in the way that it needs to.
It's a great point, because the situation I just described was kind of the individual citizen, but organizations have the same thing, right? I support the work of, well, GEO's the same, we support the work of probably 6 different departments, but it's tough to talk to 6 different people with different priorities, and so the more I see your departments coming together, working together, overlapping, it's really inspiring. I see Carrie's giving me the signal. We do have a question. Let's get that in before we wrap up.
So this question for the Minister is, what are some challenges that still need addressing across the province?
Oh, wow. That's a great question, because I think we touched on a few things that are definitely positive, but we also know that we need to make sure that when we're speaking about connection, that internet connectivity is available across the province. And drop calls, as you've mentioned there, Matt, like there are still pockets of community that need that support. So government has to continue to look at ways that, yes, there are some significant investments that are coming forward, but that's one thing that sort of jumps out in my mind. We also have to make sure that equity-deserving groups are getting the supports that they need as well. And going back to the Ivany report, we know that African Nova Scotians and Indigenous youth were not connecting to the workplace in the way that they can be and should be. So making sure that there are programs that are culturally responsive and making sure that government is responding to the needs of community. That work, I think, is always going to be happening, and we can continue to improve. But really, again, making sure that people remain at the heart of the work that we're doing. We can always achieve so many things when we work together. So we know that there's still some big challenges ahead, but I think we're up for the task when we work together.
I think you are too. All right, well, everyone, that is all the time we have for this segment today. I'd like to thank one more time our special guest, Minister Jill Balser. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Matt.
Minister, and we'll see you tonight.
Yes, that's right.
At the Nova Scotia Digital Inclusion Awards. Thank you for watching. We're so glad you made it, made time in your day for us, and we hope you enjoyed this session. I want you to enjoy the rest of the forum, and please don't forget to tune in at 7 p.m. for the Nova Scotia Digital Inclusion Awards, celebrating the incredible progress we're making together and highlighting some of the people and organizations who are making it happen.